So I'm often asked, what's one of the biggest problems that you see currently in this masculinities space that you work within, Lewis? And I want to preface this episode because often when I talk about problems, it's often seen or received as if I'm absolutely flaming or slamming the whole gender equity space or the masculinity space. I want to be really clear with this before I jump any further into this episode. This is not a shame or a shade episode. It's just me kind of surfacing some real-time processing that I am doing in relation to this work right now. Because often when people ask me what the problem is with masculinity's work, what they're really asking for is like, what do you see as the sort of methodological issues, or what do you see as some of the current presenting needs that need to be addressed? And these things are absolutely important. They're massively important. But I think when we're talking about issues, I think we need to be very specific and particular with what we're associating or what we're calling or naming issues. Because for me, one of the big issues that we often don't talk about enough, in my opinion, in this space, is the constant using of men and boys, helping men and boys, uh, serving men and boys, speaking on behalf of men and boys as a way of furthering either personal or political agendas. And I want to be really clear about this. Masculinity, gendered experience, conversations that follow those areas within the gender equity space in some way, shape, or form are rooted in specific or particular political ideas, right? Some of my ideas about masculinity, gender equity are rooted in my personal ideas in politics, right? But as I've said in previous episodes, when I go into spaces and when I work with boys, young men, masculinities, my own personal political lens is not the agenda through which my sessions are taught. And I'm not saying this to come across as I'm far more superior in this space because of that. But I think it's really important to name this in the work that we do. Because often what I'm seeing is the work that follows some of these masculinity conversations, some of these masculinity interventions are very closely intertwined with political ideologies and political belief systems that serve the person specifically who's delivering the session, or the people in the space that are delivering the session. It becomes about my political lens that I'm bringing into a space that I want to try and convince the young people that I'm working with is appropriate, the best way, the most effective way, the most helpful way and lens, as opposed to sitting with the complexity of what the young people in the room are bringing into said space. Let me unpack that. Let me go slow because I think it's really important to break down where I'm coming from when I speak to this and when I name this. This is not me saying that not having personal ideas and personal politics is, we shouldn't have that as educators or people in educational spaces. Of course, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is we need to be very careful and very attuned personally to the ways in which we present in those spaces, talking about things like masculinity, talking about things like gender equity, and being aware of our own lenses and how our own lenses can either shape, dilute, or shut down specific conversations and reflections relating to the subject areas. I said this in a previous episode as well. My role in this space, and I've said this across other podcasts, interview spaces that I've been in as well. Like for me, this work, what we do as men, as facilitators in this space across the gender equity sector or gender equity space, our job is not to tell people what to think. It's to create the conditions to show people how to think. And just because I have my lenses, just because I have my ideas and belief systems that I believe strongly, that should not be the reason, or that should not be rather the uh, lens or the perspective that I now need to try and convince everyone else in the room this is the way to go. I say to young people all the time that I work with, specifically in schools, you can disagree with me. And in fact, I encourage you to disagree with me, because this isn't about me telling you the truth. This is the way, do it this way. I'm creating space for you to think about what you think. I'm here to create space for you to think about why you think what you think. And if I come in with a specific lens that's so deeply rooted to me that if something emerges in that space that doesn't align with what I think, and I shut that down, I judge that. I judgmentally judge that in a sense of, that's terrible, because I shut it down. I push it away. I let my lens dilute or sort of block specific ideas being expressed. I'm, in my opinion, and this might, again, this might be a dysregulation station, but it might make some people activated. I'm not doing my job in a way that's conducive to what I'm talking about, because I've allowed my own personal ideas to influence and lead the direction of the session. And this is something that I feel is both an issue and a misunderstanding about the current masculinity space, and specifically the work that I facilitate. There is an idea that as professionals, we often go into these rooms with an agenda of, we must convince these boys that this way, this specific idea, this specific frame of masculinity is the most correct, is the best. They have to think like this. And honestly, I can speak from my perspective, that is not what I do. That's not what this work is about, but we're seeing it increasingly encouraged, normalized. We need to show boys this is the way. We have to do it this way. We have to come in across in this angle. We have to reinstate these ideas and values. But that's showing people what to think, not how to think. And in a cultural space, in a cultural context where so many different ideas and belief systems can exist and coexist at the same time, we have to be really clear that what we're trying to do is create critical thinking spaces, not comfortable thinking spaces. If I go in to a space, a lesson, a workshop, an assembly, and I'm directing the questions or directing the discussions in spaces that I'm comfortable, and that is not a learning space for everybody. That is just a comfortable space for me. That's just a comfortable space for me to land and say what I need to say. And then I feel like I've done a great job. But actually, I didn't go into deep waters or waters for me that might be uncomfortable. As a facilitator, for me personally, I have to model that. I have to model that I don't know. I have to model that I disagree there. I have to model I disagree, but I still care for you in this space. Because that for me is one of the biggest issues in this current context right now. Everything, even down to the granular work that we do with young people, the person-centered, the compassionate, the curious spaces that we facilitate, come in with this culturally inherited, polarized idea that I am right as the facilitator and you are wrong. And I must always be right and you're wrong. The amount of young people I've spoken to over the years that talk about some of the work they've done, previously in this gender equity space. And again, to be super clear, this is not about shading or shaming ways of working, but I can only talk about and I can only share what the young people I've worked with across a range of different schools and a range of different spaces have shared with me. Which is whenever we typically have these conversations, it's always someone coming in telling us how wrong we are. And even if there are some ideas and beliefs and behaviors that need to be addressed, even if there are things that need to be very, very quickly addressed and nipped in the bud, the way in which we do that matters. But what we're doing right now is we're saying, well, the way needs to be this way. We need to instate this value, these values, these spaces. This is what young men need right now. And it goes back to the episode I did a couple of episodes ago. Arrogance assumes what is needed. Arrogance assumes this is what men, young men, boys need. But we're seeing frequently and more frequently and more frequently people speaking on behalf of men and masculinities from this idea of this is what they need, without inquiring, without having the conversation, without reflecting in the messiness of what's going on. That for me is one of the biggest issues right now. What we're seeing right now is an area of cultural interest that must be invested in, that we have made more about our individual ideas than about the collectivity of the communities that we serve. We might, and we must, might I add, move into directions and conversations around violence against women and girls, misogyny, sex, and things that I've spoken about in previous episodes. We need to speak about things like men's mental health, the confusion and the lack of clarity at times around what masculinity is and what it means and where these messages are coming from. These are things that are massively important in the conversations, things that are massively important to address. These are things that are massively important to the communities and cultures that we're speaking to, about, and in proximity to as well, right? These are important things. But what we often do is we say, and we go into these conversations without recognizing, without reflecting, this is the way, this is what's needed, this is what we must do. This is one of the biggest issues that I see right now. Because it isn't about and I'm bringing it back to my context, this isn't about the young people that we work with in schools. This isn't about the young men that we're seeing that are leaving school, moving into, their first jobs in their career spaces and the workspaces that they're part of. This isn't about these people that we're speaking to, these young men, these masculinities. It isn't about them. It's about our politics that is masking as interest in men and boys. That's where it gets controversial. If we can reach those boys and we can show them this idea, and we can show them this belief system, we can show them this is the way to do it, then that means that we've got people that are on our side moving into the future. If they felt seen, they felt heard. That's not real containment. That's not real listening and tuning. That's not real. That is taking advantage. That is planting seeds, playing a character to elicit specific responses. That's one of the biggest issues I see right now in this space. It's never been about what I think, what facilitators think. It's been about how do we create the conditions that show young people, young masculinities in general, how to think. How do we detangle or untangle, rather, the conditioning that positions masculinity in this way? How do we untangle, make critical space for what often is assumed? How do we sit in the messiness of I don't know, I disagree, without creating this polarized I'm right, you're wrong, you're bad, I'm good? We've moved away from, in my opinion, what the most potent work is positioned within, sitting with the plurality. Even as somebody with expert status across the work that I do, this has never been about pushing an idea or an agenda on the young people that I work with, which is why when young people feed back to me at the end of sessions how they found it and what they kind of got from it, they often share, I was expecting a hammering from you. I was expecting you to roast us for the entire session and delivery. But you didn't. You asked us questions. You got us to reflect on it. You made us think about things differently. And I wasn't expecting that at that point. I can't even lie. I've got to be honest. But there's something about that that's valuable. It's not about me not parking some of my thoughts and ideas. It's just not making my thoughts and ideas the main character in the conversation, in the session, in a learning environment that isn't about me. It isn't about my agenda. It isn't about what I think all needs to be done. It's about the young people. It's about the masculinities that we're working with. And I feel like we're moving very quickly, and not many people are talking about this, in a direction where it's more about the agenda of the people, organizations running these particular spaces than it is about the young people, men, masculinities that they're serving. That's one of the biggest issues right now. Who are we actually centering? Who are we actually talking about? And hear my heart on this. This isn't me saying that we have centered, the wrong people, because there will be people that will hear that and go, see, yes, it told you. It's talking about women and girls for this time, and that's made it an issue. That's not what I'm saying. Please don't get me twisted. Lovingly, compassionately, and with all the care in my heart, that's not what I'm saying. Don't conflate what I'm saying now with we need to not center women and girls in conversations about things like violence against women and girls, misogyny and sexism, because guess what? We absolutely need to do that. That's still on the table. That's still what we must do. What I'm speaking about is when we say we're going into schools to work with men and boys, young men and boys, masculinities, and we're going to center them in the work, we better, in those spaces, center what they're thinking, what they're feeling, where it's coming from, and curiously explore that. Hold space for that, not go in with this is what you're learning, this is what we're teaching, this is why it's important. Because the moment we do that, that doesn't become a collaborative space. That becomes a learning space with the potential for condemnation. Because if you don't fit within the parameters, if you don't fit within the box, if you don't fit within this shape that we're crafting, this isn't, you're wrong, or this isn't the right way to go about doing it. And going back a few episodes, this idea, or even across some of the posts I've posted online recently, moving towards that wholeness approach instead of this is good, this is bad, is massively important. But I'm saying all of this right now. If you're asking me what some of the biggest issues are in this space right now, it's this: how easy it is for us to make work that's supposed to be about young men and masculinities about us, about the work we do, about the things we've done, about our ideas and our plates in this context, in this conversation. It's not about that. It's about going into that space and being trusted to show young men and boys how to think, not what to think. Even if what we think in this space, in our mind, is the right way, is the best way, you have to be regulated enough in your nervous system to sit with the complexity of being challenged from young people, masculinities that are in the process of figuring out where they're coming from. Sometimes they might give you something to think about. Sometimes they might give you something to reflect on. And if our heart postures are closed off to that, we're not in a collaborative space. We're in a space where we are leading with our own arrogance instead of rooting ourselves in communal curiosity. So I'm going to leave the episode there. It is a rant. Haven't done one of those in a while. Literally press record and just just had to let that out. But it's something I've been thinking about, something that I feel like I needed to speak on. And so I hope it resonated. I hope it lands with you. And if you are feeling like, Lewis has just basically roasted me for the last 20 minutes, please hear my heart again. This isn't about shaming. This isn't about shading. We all have those moments in this work where we've made the work about us and our ideas instead of the young people that we're working with. Our ideas are important. What we think is important. It just doesn't need to be the centerpiece in the work that we're doing. Because the moment it becomes personally anchored to the point where we're not willing to hear things that might challenge what we think and believe, in my opinion, we're not in a space to do this work potently. So if it does hit you in a space and place that's uncomfortable, please know my intention is not to do that to make you feel like you're doing a bad job. We all have those moments we need to kind of get body checked to be like, whoa, hold on, let me just think and reflect on that. When was the last time you reflected on the work that you do, where those ideas are coming from and how they're showing up in the space? Because if it's been a while, if it hasn't been as frequent as we think it really needs to be, here's an invitation to do that. Here's an invitation to lean into that. So thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you're well. I hope you're blessed. And if you did find this episode useful, please feel free to share with those nearest and dearest to you. Have a wonderful rest of your week. I will see you soon. God bless. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.